Welcome back. 37 years ago, Pan Am Flight 103 from Frankfurt to Detroit was destroyed by a bomb while flying over the Scottish town of Lockerbie. 270 people were killed in what was one of the deadliest attacks in the history of the United Kingdom. The only person convicted in the attack was al-Migrahi, a Libyan intelligence officer, and Gaddafi accepted Libya's responsibility in 2003. On 7 July 2005, London witnessed 3 trains bombed on the London Underground. The suicide bomber was Shehzad Tanveer. Guess where he was trained? Before the bombings in 2004, Tanveer visited the Lashkar camp in Muridke, which India struck in Operation Sindoor. With the Ravi Shankar Prasad, the led team now set to visit United Kingdom to put forth India's stance against terrorism and seek unity from the world. What is UK's stance going to be? Is it time for the UN to pass a clear resolution defining terror, or do we wait a little more? Mr. David Vance is joining us on the broadcast to talk more about this. David, appreciate you being here. Thank you for taking out the time and speaking with us. Well, India, as you know, has taken upon itself to not only rid itself but the world of terrorism, and at the same time it is also galvanizing a force of responsible people, member of parliaments, bureaucrats, diplomats, who are going all over the world trying to show the real picture of terrorism and where it emanates from. The answer is it emanates from Pakistan, and the solution is that the world recognizes it. Do you think that the United Kingdom endorses this point of view that India has had for so long?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with what you've just said. India is doing the world a favor, and this is my whole point, because I see this as a war between civilization and barbarism, and the barbarism is essentially Pakistan incarnate, right? So that being said, the question you ask is, will the UK be sympathetic? I'll be honest with you, and I think the UK government will not be that sympathetic. And the reason for that is that the UK government, sadly, is very much enthralled to the Pakistani diaspora, which is a core part of its voter base. So it will not want to upset them. So whilst I think it's important that India travels the world to make the case and to gainers and to get support, and I completely agree with that, I just fear that the British government under Sir Keir Starmer is probably sympathetic to Pakistan, truth be told.
Well, there's been a trade agreement between the United Kingdom and India very recently, and that is of course something which both the countries have welcomed. It's going to make trade, it's going to make people-to-people connection a lot easier and a lot more amicable. The United Kingdom has never shared this kind of rapport, if I can call it that, with Pakistan. But yet, when you say that the people who live in United Kingdom and are of Pakistani origin are going to be upset, but there are more Indians than Pakistanis in the United Kingdom who might get upset if the United Kingdom does not take a stance against terrorism.
Oh yeah, well you're absolutely right. But here's the difference. The difference is that the Indian diaspora in the UK is very well integrated, very civilized, and contributes and behaves itself and respects our laws. That cannot be said of the Pakistani diaspora in the UK, which, as you know, carries out, for example, the jihad rape gangs that we see in many of our towns and cities, and which has been responsible for acts of jihad in the UK. So I get what you're saying. I understand the UK did a trade deal with India, and that's great. I'm really pleased about that. That's good news. But I don't think you can then therefore assume that in the back of that, the UK will naturally be sympathetic to Prime Minister Modi's Operation Sindoor and all that flows from that. I think that would be potentially overly optimistic, if I can put it to you like this. But then again, you can go beyond the British government. You don't actually need the British government. What you want is the British people to be better informed, which is, I know, part of what you're all trying to do and which I'm supportive of. And that can be done through new media as much as through existing British media, which unfortunately the government controls.
Well, there's also a charge against the Western media, some of the Western countries, that they do not understand the scope and scale of the hostilities between India and Pakistan. If you look at the recent war that concluded between India and Pakistan to a ceasefire, you know, both these countries are nuclear, and yet right immediately after the ceasefire, David, the Western media and the Western countries completely slipped this topic into oblivion, whereas Hamas and Gaza and Israel do feature on front page of Western dailies all the time. Do you think that this conflict and this hostility is neglected?
Absolutely do, and you're so right in what you said there. No sooner had the ceasefire came about than the issue completely disappeared from Western news media. It just didn't receive any more coverage. I mean, but even if it did get coverage, the Western media portray it all as basically, you know, basically one is as bad as the other. India and Pakistan, what's the difference? You know, it's the coverage is so biased in the West, so disconnected from actual reality. Because as we said at the beginning of this, anyone who understands what's happening here understands that the West, meaning from the US to the UK, Europe, all the countries, our interests align, as far as I can see, with India's interest. And that is, you've got a rogue neighbour who's got nukes. You've got a nuclear armed rogue neighbour, which is a terroristic state. Now, it's not in the interest of any other country in the world to support that, but yet the media don't really want to get to grips with that. And I think we have to force the issue upon them and make them understand that this is a huge geopolitical significant issue and we should be standing with India.
David, one last question before we let you go. Do you think that the United Nations is a defunct body, and a country like India that represents 1/5 of humanity should be a permanent member? If not, then obviously there is something wrong with this association.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, I think that the United Nations is a failed organization. It's not so long, back in 2018, I spoke at a UN committee meeting in Geneva to point out the problems of Pakistan and what it constituted. And I mean, the UN, they're just not interested, unfortunately. They don't have the moral clarity to understand what the issue is here. And as I say, that issue is that you've got a rogue nation, it's got nuclear nukes, and it needs to be brought to heel. And that can only be done if we all support India.
David, thank you so much for taking out the time and speaking to us.